Military jets as Russia launches a massive assault on Ukraine from the air.
Breaking news. In the early morning hours of September 20th, 2025, at approximately 2:45 a.m. local time, Russia launched one of its most aggressive aerial strikes against Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion. Nearly 580 drones, 32 cruise missiles, and 8 ballistic missiles filled the sky. But this attack carried a twist that shocked observers worldwide. For the first time, Russian forces targeted Ukrainian fighter jets directly near the western border. That decision, reckless and dangerous, triggered a cascade of responses from NATO allies and raised questions about whether Moscow had crossed a red line it could not step back from. All night, Ukraine was under a massive attack by Russia, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced. His words were not exaggeration. Across 9 different regions, including Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Chernihiv, Zaporizhia, Poltava, Kiev, Odessa, Sumy, and Kharkiv, the assault hit hard. Air raid sirens howled in the darkness. In Dnipro, a rocket with cluster munitions smashed into a high-rise building, tearing through walls and shattering buildings. Fires raged. In Chernihiv, a 62-year-old man was killed by a drone strike. In Khmelnytskyi, 20 homes were damaged, and 1 body was recovered after fire consumed a building. By dawn, at least 3 civilians were dead, and more than 30 were injured. And in the middle of this chaos, Russian weapons locked onto Ukrainian fighter jets in flight, a new and dangerous escalation. Until now, Russia had focused most of its long-range attacks on infrastructure, power grids, warehouses, railways, and residential areas. Strikes against Ukrainian jets had been rare and usually occurred at airfields. But on September 20th, the reports from Ukraine's Air Force were clear. Russian long-range aviation targeted fighter aircraft in operation near the western border. So why would Russia make this choice now? And what did it risk by doing so? Targeting Ukrainian jets in the sky is not just an attack on military hardware. It raises the chance of debris, explosions, or even stray missiles falling into NATO territory. With strikes happening only minutes from Poland's border, one wrong trajectory could have triggered NATO's collective defense clause. That's why many analysts called it a big mistake. As soon as Ukraine reported the strikes, Poland's military moved fast. At around 3:30 a.m., Poland's operational command posted a message on X. Due to the activity of the Russian Federation's long-range aviation, which is carrying out strikes on the territory in Ukraine, Polish and Allied aviation has begun operating in our airspace. Duty fighter pairs have been scrambled, and ground-based air defense systems, as well as radio location reconnaissance, have reached a state of maximum readiness. Think about the stakes here. Poland, a NATO member, scrambled its F-16 fighter jets into the sky. Alongside them, Allied jets from the United States and other NATO partners joined patrols. Ground-based missile defense systems, including Patriot batteries, went live. For nearly 90 minutes, Polish skies were on edge, prepared for the possibility that a Russian missile could cross the border. Now the open question: what if one had? Would NATO have intercepted and destroyed it? And if so, how would Moscow respond? This wasn't the only provocation that week. Just hours earlier on September 19th, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets entered Estonian airspace over the Gulf of Finland. They stayed inside NATO skies for about 12 minutes, flying without transponders and without flight plans. Estonia's defense ministry released a map showing the path. The jets flew parallel to the border and crossed nearly 10 kilometers deep. Italian F-35s scrambled, supported by Swedish and Finnish aircraft. NATO forces intercepted the jets and warned them off. Estonia called it an unprecedentedly brazen act. Moscow denied everything, claiming the flights followed international rules. In fact, these aircraft had their transponders switched off. That's like driving at night on a highway with your headlights off. Invisible and dangerous to everyone around. When paired with Russia's targeting of Ukrainian fighters the very next day, NATO leaders saw a clear pattern. Moscow was pushing the limits on all fronts, in Ukraine and in NATO airspace. Let's step back to the bigger picture. Russia's strike that night was massive by every measure. 579 drones were used, some carrying explosives, others acting as dummy decoys to soak up Ukrainian air defense fire. Alongside them came 32 cruise missiles and 8 ballistic missiles. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted the majority, but not all. Civilian neighborhoods were hit, infrastructure was damaged. And according to regional officials, at least 8 Ukrainians died across 24 hours of Russian attacks, with more than 30 wounded. The horror for civilians is hard to overstate. Imagine trying to sleep only to hear buzzing drones overhead, followed by explosions, glass shattering, and buildings collapsing. The smell of smoke mixed with the acrid stench of gunpowder filled city air. Children cried in basements while rescue teams fought fires in the streets. Zelensky summed it up. Every such strike is not a military necessity, but a deliberate strategy by Russia to terrorize civilians. But Ukraine didn't stay silent. That same night, Ukrainian drones struck deep inside Russian territory. Explosions erupted in the Samara and Saratov regions, hundreds of kilometers from the front line. Oil facilities were set ablaze. The governor of Samara confirmed that 4 Russians were killed. In Saratov, windows shattered across housing blocks, and 1 woman was hospitalized. Videos showed huge fireballs rising from oil refineries. And the shocking thing, analysts estimate that Ukrainian drones have already knocked out nearly 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity in the last year. That's a crippling blow to Moscow's economy and military fuel supplies. The loop closes here. While Russia tries to terrorize Ukraine with drones, Ukraine quietly strikes back by hitting Russia's ability to fuel its war machine. The September 20 attack wasn't limited to the battlefield. On the same night, a cyber attack disrupted major European airports. In Brussels, more than 10 flights were canceled and 17 delayed. In London Heathrow and Berlin Brandenburg, passengers faced long waits. The issue traced back to Collins Aerospace Muse system, which handles check-in and boarding. Poland's digital affairs minister confirmed there was no direct threat to Polish airports, but the timing was suspicious. When drones are raining on Ukraine, Russian jets are pushing into NATO airspace, and suddenly European airports go offline, the pattern is hard to ignore. The question that remains open: was this part of a coordinated Russian effort to stretch Europe's defenses, or simply coincidence? The fighter jet incident placed NATO in a bind. On one hand, its forces scrambled quickly. On the other, the alliance still resists calls to create a no-fly zone or joint air defense umbrella directly over Ukraine. Instead, NATO continues reinforcing its eastern flank. A new mission, Eastern Sentry, was launched earlier in September. Britain, Denmark, France, and Germany are sending more hardware to Poland, Estonia, and Romania. But Zelensky is frustrated. He argues that until Ukraine and NATO integrate defenses fully, Russia will keep exploiting gaps. For a reliable shield, we must act together, he said. So how long can NATO sit on the sidelines when Russian attacks keep brushing up against their borders? Of course, Moscow denies everything. The defense ministry insists its jets did not violate Estonian skies. It claims no drones entered Polish territory on purpose. It even says the strikes on September 20 were in strict accordance with international law. But evidence tells a different story. Estonian radar maps, NATO pilot accounts, and Ukrainian Air Force data all paint a clear picture. Russian forces are becoming more reckless. On the very same night Russia struck Ukraine, it also claimed to have shot down 149 Ukrainian drones over its own territory, including Crimea and multiple Russian regions. If true, that would mark one of the largest drone defense operations ever recorded. The September 20 attack reminded everyone that civilians remain at the heart of this war. Apartment fires in Dnipro, a man burned in Chernihiv, families huddled in dark basements as drones whined overhead. But it also showed the danger for the world, with Polish jets scrambling, Estonian skies violated, and NATO on high alert. The war risks pulling in far more countries than before. Western leaders immediately condemned the attacks. Estonia invoked NATO Article 4 consultations, forcing allies to meet and discuss their collective response. US President Donald Trump warned, "I don't like when that happens. It could be big trouble." The question hanging in the air: if Russia keeps targeting Ukrainian fighters so close to NATO borders, how long before big trouble actually arrives? In the end, by sunrise on September 20th, the skies had quieted. Fires burned in Ukrainian cities, smoke rose from Russian oil refineries, and airports across Europe reset their systems. But the world understood something new. Russia had made a mistake. It thought targeting Ukrainian fighter jets would show strength. Instead, it revealed weakness, desperation to score victories, even at the cost of risking NATO confrontation. If this is what one night of escalation looks like, what happens when the next Russian missile, drone, or jet doesn't just brush NATO borders, but crosses them fully? The world is waiting for that answer. Subscribe and turn on the bell to discover hidden strategies and frontline stories no one else is willing to share.